There is so much to see in Resident Evil Village. Insert Lady Dimitrescu reference here, but what's particularly interesting is what they don't say. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 things Resident Evil Village doesn't tell you. Starting off at number 10, hardcore difficulty is actually the coolest way to play. Okay, so when starting Resident Evil Village for the first time, you get your 3 standard difficulty options: easy, normal, and hard. There is a bit of discussion out there about which difficulty is best for the game. For our money, hard, which is called hardcore in this game, is probably the best way to play it. It doesn't change much about the game, it just makes the enemies a little tougher, a little more aggressive, a little more damaging. For a lot of games, that would simply make it more frustrating, but for this one, we think it really adds to the horror experience. Now, I am not saying that standard difficulty is easy or anything. It's about in line with normal difficulty for most other Resident Evil games. Maybe a little easier, not shockingly so or anything, but hardcore is just a little bit tougher than you'd expect from a quote-unquote normal run-through of these games. And we're not saying that you should substitute it out for normal here, but it's a good option. It's probably the most satisfying way to play. As long as you play fairly carefully in the normal game, you'll get through most encounters without a lot of difficulty, whereas with hardcore, things get a lot more involved. You have to be careful about what items you craft, when you craft them, how you deal with enemy encounters, etc. In our mind, it makes the game more interesting to play, even if it is a little bit, and I am not skimping on this, it is a little bit more frustrating at times. Enemies are tankier, they can kill you a lot faster, and we're talking like 2 or 3 attacks. That's what it takes to kill you. So understanding the way the game plays is key for survival. The biggest hurdle you'll have to overcome when playing hardcore is the opening attack sequence. This is the first real gameplay in the whole game, and even on normal, it can kick your ass. On hardcore, it can kind of seem impossible. The trick to the sequence is simply to avoid the enemies. Shooting enemies would mainly just stun them, so like incorporate that into your strategy. Don't bother trying to kill him because the sequence, this one cannot be won. It's all about waiting out the clock and triggering the ending cutscene, and as long as you run away from enemies and keep moving and slow them down with the explosives dotted around, you will get through it. Once that part's done, it's much smoother sailing for literally the rest of the game in comparison. Hardcore difficulty is it's a satisfying challenge, at least in our minds. It's not for everyone. Normal is still a tense experience, especially for somebody just coming to the series. But if you want to go all out, hardcore is the best way to experience it. One more thing, if you pre-ordered the game and have the harder than hard Village of Shadows difficulty unlocked from the start, don't play it. It's going to be too difficult for a first playthrough, but it also remixes enemy encounters that actually spoils them in terms of how the game plays out in any of the other difficulty modes. Village of Shadows is meant to be played after going through the game at least once, so at least from the gameranx crew, we don't recommend bothering with your first playthrough. Unless you're like a masochist or something, then, whatever. Moving on to number 9, do not be afraid to run. We mentioned that opening sequence, but listen, the game can be overwhelming, but there's one thing you can do to make things easier on yourself, and it's run. Yeah, in many instances, there's obviously nothing stopping you from simply running past enemies or avoiding them completely. This is true not just for the regular enemies, the more obvious stalker enemies who are invincible, but even the larger boss-like enemies that start showing up who take a ton of punishment and all but single-handedly sap your ammo reserves. Avoiding these guys completely is actually a viable strategy, and it's pretty much required on the harder difficulties where ammo is a lot more scarce. One more important thing to remember is that safe rooms are, well, actually safe. If there's a typewriter in a room and it's playing comforting music, then no enemy will follow you in there. That's pretty obvious, but there are other situations where large enemies won't follow you down certain paths or inside buildings as well. This is something that is a little more exploitable. You can easily cheese certain enemies by standing near a narrow path, entering the area to get their attention, fire off a few shots, and then retreat back into that passage. The enemy becomes less aggro, and you can just keep repeating the process until they're dead. It's cheesy, but it's not a joke. These guys are actually pretty tough, and you might as well take advantage any way you can. At number 8, the quick turn ability is a lifesaver. The quick turn is a Resident Evil staple. Though it's never given a tutorial in this game, it's still something you can do. To do a 180-degree turn, just press circle or B while holding backward. This allows you to quickly remove yourself from a dangerous situation, and it's significantly faster than turning around yourself, especially if you're using a controller. The ability to quickly turn might not seem like a whole lot at first, and it was never really necessary for most of the bosses in RE7, but here it can be a complete lifesaver. Unlike the previous game, in Village, you'll often have to contend with swarms of enemies that can easily surround and overwhelm you. On top of that, a lot of the bosses pretty much force you to run away from them on multiple occasions, so if you're not using quick turn, there are parts where you're going to take damage that could have been avoided. And sure, that's not a big deal on normal most of the time, but on hardcore, 1 or 2 bad hits can really mean game over. At number 7 is what to upgrade first. Village throws a ton of stuff at you regarding upgrades. There's parts to modify weapons, recipes to buy, and weapon upgrades to purchase, and if you're pretty thorough about exploration, you will have plenty of money, and you shouldn't need to be too particular about stuff you buy, but there's still definitely some items and upgrade paths that are better than others. Let's get the obvious out of the way. Upgrading your inventory size, it's always useful. It is without question one of the first things you should put money into when the option to do so pops up. Just to be clear, that's true of most games, by the way. Bullet recipes are, of course, also worth buying. They're cheap, and in many cases, enemies will only drop crafting items, and rarely will they ever drop actual ammo if you're running low. So, having more options regarding what ammo to craft is never a bad thing. For upgrading options, something very nice to keep in mind is that when you upgrade the ammo capacity of a weapon, it'll automatically get a full clip no matter what. Even if you're completely out of ammo for a weapon, it'll give you a full clip after buying this upgrade. It's not incredibly useful for weapons with common ammo like the pistol or shotgun, but this upgrade is incredibly useful for stuff like the sniper rifle, which can be, well, stingy to say the least when it comes to ammo. Getting the capacity upgrade basically equals a free clip of ammo for the weapon, so if you want to get the most out of certain weapons, then wait to buy the ammo capacity upgrade until after you've used all of its ammo. Basically, this allows you to go nuts on bosses with a gun, because you got a whole other clip waiting for you when you find a store again. This is exactly like Resident Evil 4. It was an awesome bonus then, and it's super useful now. Even if they got smart here and made it so you can't increase the capacity for some of the best weapons like the Magnum and the grenade launcher, that doesn't stop this from being great. At number 6, blocking is way better than it seems. One key feature that's carried over into this game from Resident Evil 7 is the ability to block. It seems like some normal guy's skinny forearms wouldn't be much defense against some claws or blades, but when it comes to protecting you from damage, blocking actually works. For one thing, the amount of damage it absorbs is actually significant, so while I am not sure exactly how much it actually protects you, once you start using it consistently, you will notice a big difference in the amount of damage you're taking. On top of that, it's actually possible to push enemies after blocking them. This is an absolutely vital skill when you're playing on harder difficulties, because it'll stun an enemy for a long time, making them vulnerable to critical hits, and they drop their weapons, which is also great. Even better, if there is a crowd of enemies around you, pushing an enemy attack back will stun everything it gets pushed into, making this technique incredibly useful for escaping a horde of enemies that are blocking the way or have you stuck in a corner. When playing on hardcore, pushing enemies is practically essential. Pushing can sometimes allow you to entirely bypass groups of enemies as long as you've got the timing right. And it's not too hard to pull off once you understand how it works. Just hold down the block button when the enemy attacks. If they look like they got deflected by it, then tap the block button quickly to push them. Sadly, you can't follow it up with an RE4 style wrestling move, but it's still pretty awesome and it is a very useful skill. At number 5, you should go around and touch everything. The map function for this game is surprisingly in-depth. It shows you every door you've opened, every treasure map you've collected, and every well you've passed by. It separates rooms by if they've been completed or not, and it shows every door and object you can interact with. It even shows if there are animals to hunt. It's very detailed, and because you'll be visiting the main village so often, it's useful for telling you what you've already done and what still needs to be explored. Because of that, it's smart to just have a look around. Check the locks, find any obstructions, and that stuff will be automatically marked on your map, so when you inevitably return to the village later, you can tell at a glance if certain obstructions have moved or if the required key item is something you have, so you can open certain doors. Just be thorough. Check your map. You can end up saving a lot of time regarding backtracking or wandering around. It's just a great all-around feature. At number 4, you can break more stuff than what is highlighted yellow. So at this point, it's really easy to identify the stuff you can break in a Resident Evil game, right? There are boxes covered in yellow tape, vases that are unusually large, and pretty much anything that is yellow. If you take the time to smash this stuff, more often than not, you get some kind of item. But this game decided to get cute. It's actually hiding money and stuff in other different kinds of objects in the world, and they're rewards that aren't always as good as what you'd get from a standard container, but still worth hunting down. Probably the easiest to miss are the various breakable objects in the world that aren't clearly item containers. Stuff like small vases on shelves or assorted stuff. Sometimes, but not always, they'll drop items when broken. It usually only ends up being like a small amount of cash, but a little bit can go a long way, especially if you're playing on the higher difficulties. A more obvious thing to break is actually a holdover from Resident Evil 4. Sometimes you can see like a shiny little light on the wall or surface. If you shoot it, something valuable might drop out. Often a cheaper variety of treasure that you can resell. Another noteworthy breakable are the bird cages that you can see all around the village. Like, shooting these will usually net some kind of useful reward. They just look like random bits of scenery, but if you see one, don't hesitate to shoot it down. There's probably something good in it. At number 3 is hunting tips. At a certain point in the game, hunting becomes available, and it is in your best interest to do it. The meals you can make with the various meats give you permanent upgrades to your stats. So the best meals you can make are the ones that require special meat, and there's 3 of these in total, and each one comes from a special animal that appears in the central village area. First one is the white pig. It appears by the fallow plot by the well on your first revisit to the village. If you're thorough, you won't miss him, as you'll probably be going around checking the wells at this point. Second one, the blue crow, is a little harder to notice. It's in the cemetery up on a tree, and at this point in the game, you might not even think to shoot crows for meat, but it's what drops the finest poultry for whatever reason. The last and potentially most useful is the golden fish, which when cooked gives you a permanent movement speed upgrade. You move pretty slow in this game by default, so even moving a little bit faster is a huge improvement. This one is really easy to miss though. You gotta take a boat found in the Lone Road Bridge south towards a small fishing spot, but that's where you can find this fish, and you need it to get this upgrade. Moving on to number 2, werewolves and axe giants can be killed. At a certain point in the game, the standard lichen and ghouls start getting back up. Like, these guys are nasty as hell, and at first, you might not think these things are even possible to kill. Of course, this being Resident Evil, they can be killed, but they're not going to go down without a fight. Take, for example, the werewolf. These guys are super fast and have an unavoidable attack that can drop your health to almost nothing. They seem to be like impossible stalkers, but with enough ammo, you can take them down. On normal, it takes about 30 pistol bullets and 10 shotgun shells to deal with, and on hardcore, that number is even higher. You do get valuable treasure for taking them out, but for most people, that's going to cost them most of their valuable ammo to just deal with one enemy. If you don't want to deal with that, then the Magnum makes short work of these guys. Just 3 or 4 shots can take them out, and each shot stuns them for multiple seconds, basically making them completely defenseless. If you can get one shot off on them, they're pretty much dead. And number 1, this one's really simple, and I'm not going to overstate the point too much, but you can deflect arrows with a melee attack. Yep, it's exactly what it sounds like. The knife may be a weapon that's kind of a last resort thing, but if you time it right, you can actually deflect an incoming arrow with a swing of your knife. It is not very practical, but you will feel like an absolute badass if you pull it off. It takes some practice, but it's definitely possible, and in some cases even useful. That's all for today though. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. The best way to see them first is, of course, the subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable all notifications, and as always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.